Hi, everyone. Today we have an exciting conversation about legal design. What is it and how do you enjoy it and how do you make sure that it benefits your life and the life of your clients? I have a very special guest, Marty. Welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Marty Finestone. I am in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, which geographically, I'll just say an hour west of Toronto. I'm a lawyer and legal designer here. I'm also a father, husband, and an artist.
Tell us about your legal career, just so that folks can appreciate your journey as a lawyer.
So if we go all the way back to the before times, I did an undergraduate degree in what was called media, information, and technoculture. That's back when we thought cyberspace was a place, or questioning if it's a place. This is before Napster. I did this, so that program had a bit of it was a true liberal arts program with a bit of sociology, English, pop culture, philosophy, critical theory, political economy, information, and law. So I had a phenomenal professor, Ian Kerr, and he was at the University of Western Ontario where this was, and he was teaching this an introduction to law course for this program. I was like, this stuff's interesting, and he'd encourage us. He was one of those once in a lifetime, change your life kind of professors. He was young, he was engaging, he encouraged us, even though we weren't law students, to bring things we saw out in the world, bring it in, and let's talk about it and unpack it. I'm like, this law stuff's interesting. I love tech. I was designing websites at the time, and I thought, I'm not going to pursue sort of business, which is what I was thinking. I'm going to try this law thing. And so I ended up going to the University of Ottawa, following him there, and focusing on technology. Legal law, the intersection of law and technology is my interest. Then I articled at the CRTC, which is the Canadian equivalent of the FCC. So it's our telecommunications broadcasting regulator. I was there at the time when they were looking at things like approving satellite radio in Canada. So it was really interesting to sort of get that regulator mindset, see policy in play, see the government and everything that comes with it work. And then I decided to further my career with a concentration in law and technology, getting my LLM. Did that for a year. And then I joined up with Gowling, LaFleur Henderson at the time. Now it's Gowling WLG in their Waterloo office, practicing tech law. And for that meant licensing. So doing a lot of licensing work, tech transactions, and then business law for tech clients and non-tech clients. I did that for about 13 or so years. In that time, I had some comments at in-house counsel, so a small size, and so got a taste of the in-house life there, but then really got the innovation bug, if you will. And about a year and a half, not quite a year and a half ago, started Legal Adjacency, which is a consultancy I have that focuses on helping in-house legal departments do more with less, or really what that means is simplifying their legal docs and their legal ops.
Oh, I love that journey. You gotta love a professor who makes law engaging and then releases you into the real world, and you have a culture shock. How was that?
So coming, say, from the LLM side, where you're thinking a lot of academic terms, and I was thinking about sort of on the public law side and looking at biometric surveillance. Well, okay, so I had some practical experience being at the BC Information Privacy Commissioner on sort of a scholar in residency there, but then really the real world of practicing law, it's so different. So law, as I'm sure you've had other guests talk about, how law school doesn't prepare you for actually doing client service. So that's something I always thought about, and that's really what comes into a lot of play. What I do now is that client service, that customer experience. And so we'll kind of get to that a little later as we dive deep into legal design and how that is something that I really have an interest in. I wouldn't say a passion, but because I find that term's a little overused. But anyways, that's here and over there.
Let's talk about legal design. What is it?
So I'm going to start by saying what it isn't. So design, too often, especially lawyers are going to think this, they think design is aesthetics, but design really is sort of the process of making things work for people, making things people want to consume, want to engage in. And so legal design, there isn't really a fixed definition because there's sort of some it's evolving. It's a bit of a buzzword. What it comes down to is really taking the inspiration from design thinking, which is a mentality, and applying that to legal systems, legal services, legal processes. And in that design thinking, it's thinking like a designer, which is looking at not the what, but the why. So always looking underneath things. So it's about so to me, legal design is a mindset that's different than what lawyers typically use. We use a lot of analytical thinking and critical thinking, and which is seeking to eliminate all this extra information and get down to the simpler elements. And so we have lawyers go to law school to be taught to think like a lawyer. And so that means learning to break down the complex fact patterns, identify issues, apply the rules, and then articulate a position. But that's not quite giving advice. Design, on the other hand, and design thinking, it's constructing an emphasis on creative thinking over analytical thinking, but it does involve some analytical thinking. So it's about exploring. It's a lens through which you're going to look at not necessarily at the facts, but the experiences. So it's not accepting a situation as it is or as it's described, but you're sort of peeling back the layers of the onion and looking what's underneath. I guess to put it simply, analytical thinking, critical thinking, what lawyers do is finding the right answers. Design thinking or legal design is finding and asking the right questions.
Can those two ways of thinking about the world, the sort of the left and right brain, can they sort of coexist happily in one person who gives good legal advice?
Yes. Yes, they can coexist, because if you ask the right questions, you're going to give an answer that is sort of meaningful to the person asking it. So if you focus on the user, focus on humans, and look at what their underlying needs are, and that's at the center of legal design, that human-centered approach, you're going to meet them where they are, meet their needs, and so they're going to be more responsive to what you have. When it comes to, so that could be how you give legal advice, that could be how you present it, and that could be in what the advice is. We kind of teased it in for this session that, businesses, if we take it in the in-house role, they don't have legal problems, they have business problems. That business problem may need a legal lens to it, that analytical lens to it. But at the end of the day, you're giving that business advice. So that's how I see that duality, because the lawyers still have to do this stuff, do the law, they have to be doers.
Let's talk about, why legal design, what's so special about it? You mentioned customer user centricity. I would love to kind of understand why that is important. Anything else that is special about it?
So what's special about it is it's a fresh approach to legal services. And so that is taking that user-centered approach and really not ignoring it, which I think happens too much. And it's in that thinking like a lawyer mindset, where we jump to where we think the analysis needs to go. It's that critical analytical thinking without pausing to say, okay, who is actually using this? So I'll give you the example of a contract. In a B2B contract, a lawyer is going to focus on the negotiation, getting it to signature. Yes, they'll do some questions asking, okay, what's the deal here? Looking for the provisions for the deal, but they're not actually thinking about the next step in terms of post-signature. Who's implementing it? What do they need? What should the agreement cover to have that? Who is the audience for this agreement? Are we writing in the language that works for them? Or is it all legalese? So is it actually making the contract a livable instrument that fits the users of the agreement, the people who are actually going to be living under it? And so that's where you're thinking about the humans and the users of something versus actually those who are just sort of putting the request there. So it's not thinking about your client, it's thinking about your client's client or your client's users. So that's one way I say what's special about it.
Marty, you talked about two things, design and creativity. Those are, there's an overlap clearly, but they're not the same things. And, to someone who has a classic legal education, the two together with law may sound like, I don't know, an oxymoron. I think that's the word I'm looking for. So I'm going to ask you again the same question I asked you. How do you reconcile that classic legal training
Sure.
and that analytical emphasis and that ability to critically think and narrow the issue with the creativity and design and exploration, which is like much more expensive and much more user focused and completely different methodology? How would you explain, you and I are on the same page, how do you explain to somebody who's been practicing law in the way law school has intended for you to practice for the last 30 years?
Taking this legal design mindset, so look at it as a mindset to expand upon that analytical thinking and maybe use a couple more tools in your toolkit. And really where that comes in great for in terms of legal analysis is in the problem scoping phase. So rather than jumping to the issue spotted, for example, could be that this deal reflects this, or we're licensing 10 of these seats to something, or something like that. You're sort of going beyond that and looking at, so call that the what or the thing, and you're digging underneath. You see this in alternative dispute resolution, thinking back to like from the Harvard School about getting to yes, especially with mediation. You're looking at the underlying interests. So what's motivating people? What are their needs? What's not being met? And how to address that. It's looking at the starting point, analyzing the questions, analyzing the issues from a better understanding. And you're always asking why something is, drilling down to get to those human needs. From there, you may actually see that there was a root cause of the problem that actually needs to be addressed as opposed to what's on the surface. Think of it another way. Legal design is at its outset is looking at not the symptoms, not treating the symptoms of something, but looking for the underlying malady that's there.
You've talked about a couple of things. You talked about the contract, my favorite subject. Mm-hmm. Alert, we can talk about it all day. So
oh yeah, me too.
Up.
Yeah.
Buckle up. And then alternative fee arrangements. And you also mentioned that you work with in-house attorneys, mm-hmm. and then also been in-house and familiar with it. If you were to advise in-house practitioners where the opportunity for legal design is and where to focus, what is the universe and where would you start?
Sure. So for me, what I do, I focus on three areas, do three things. I help my clients who are in in-house departments have engaging, easy to understand, easy to negotiate contracts. Second thing I do is provide sort of looking for the most important problem to them and helping them address that problem by using legal design skills. So that might be a problem I've worked on is we don't know what KPIs to measure, or there's this perception that things are always stuck in legal, or we need to communicate with the business on the platforms they use. How do we do that? And so it's some of that innovation, if you will. So it's that innovation mindset, which I always like to remind people, innovation is not invention, it's improvement. And so it's bringing that curiosity and looking at the user-centered issue, in terms of to bring that innovation. Third thing I do, coming back to that, are experiences. So these might be experiences based around not just for in-house, but for the legal community. I had done one recently, which I called the Deep Work Sprint. So we warmed up with some contract simplification exercises, but then help people address the problem as how do you work well and work deeply and all in on something, as opposed to when our typical pattern is the shallow work where we're doing switch tasking, multitasking. We're busy, but we're not getting a lot done. So those are sort of the three things I do. But a big area of legal design where it sees itself in-house is contract simplification, visual contracts. So we could certainly go down that route. But then it's about process improvement.
Well, yeah, that you don't have to ask me twice. We're gonna go to.
Okay, let's do that.
Because you just mentioned two words with the word contract that don't usually go together. One word, engaging.
Yes.
Engaging. I don't know how often that happens. And too easy. The two words don't usually go with a contract. So let's explore both. Let's talk about engaging. How do you make contracts engaging? What does that mean? Who does it
Yeah.
engage? And what are the examples of way to make it engaging?
So the first way to make it engaging is to know your audience, who is actually going to read or use the contract, and more importantly, that using point. So you have to message and speak and make it usable and accessible to that audience. So if it's accessible to them, something they could use, so it's useful, they're going to be engaged by it. So it's not about a one size fits all to just slap on some icons or put a lot of a nice little font. It's about actually understanding the audience, using words they use, using terminology that they'll understand, where you can, because sometimes you can escape legal terms of art. So for example, if you say security interest, I mean, the law that's there. So some things you can avoid, but using a lot of plain language goes a lot of ways. Another way to make it engaging is to actually make the information easy to use. So that's pulling on content design and information design. So you're making it readable. We all skim now. No one's reading things unless they really, really, really have to. So it's kind of pulling in some of these elements of the language you're using and how you're presenting it to make it engaging. But think about accessibility too, where you have people with visual issues. So that's where you can't just rely on visual contracts to make it engaging to that audience. Then it would have to be formatted in a way that's easy for screen readers to read it and to read it to the user and make it accessible in that way. Another way to make it engaging is how you format a contract. So maybe put all the business terms in the front, put all the legal stuff in the back. So then those who actually are going to address the business issues and live under it, as I call it, they have everything easy to access. But even for the lawyers who are negotiating, why not put a term sheet front page that at least says, oh, limitation of liability, it's mutual. So then they know going into it sort of what to expect with this agreement, and have the address for service notice for the notice address for service right at the front, make it easy to find. So it's letting it live beyond just a CLM database, but thinking that post-signature implementation point. I know I probably am ticking off some people there.
So let's talk about easy. So I remember being a junior lawyer, actually not even a lawyer. I was I was an intern, and I was a clerk at one of the firms. Since I've been a clerk in more than one firm, so you won't know which one it is. One of those firms, a well-known partner, very well-recognized IP lawyer, takes us to a well-known Silicon Valley company. You heard of that company before. When we walk in, we're asked to sign, whatever we're asked to sign, we all duly sign. He then turns it around and asks, how many of you read what you signed? And to our surprise, we're like, none of us did. And he said, that's exactly the point. If a law student, a lawyer doesn't read it, you have no reasonable expectation that anyone else outside of interest of reading a contract will actually read a contract. You, on the other hand, talking about easy to read and engaging. We just talk about engaging. Let's talk about easy. One of the things you mentioned is formatting, changing the terms, the business up front, legal in the back, anything else. And then actually, most importantly, how do we shift that thinking where that we actually specifically write terms of use so nobody actually have an interest to read them? How do we convince lawyers to actually have an intent to write something that is actually sees the day of light?
Well, so there's I'll call it the wishful thinking or the desire of wanting the change and the practical reality. Let me talk about the wishful thinking, and then if I forget to remind me to get back to the reality. So there's definitely a drive, especially in the in-house world, to use plain language, use better language, remove the legalese, remove redundancy, remove confusion. Actually, that makes for better contracts, because when you pull away the confusion, you're not giving a potentially adversarial or angry party the ability to sort of twist into some confusing language or ambiguous language and make an argument that's going to hurt you. So actually, it's a risk mitigation to use better language and plain language, but it's that clarity of language that makes things better. So rather than using terms like notwithstanding, or here's an example of making things shorter. For the purposes of, we have 4 words right there. If I just said because, that's 1 word. It's the same thing. So there's a lot of different ways.
Remove the aura of being a lawyer.
Well, no, but it'll be a different art, because
But I think it makes it challenging for some folks to live with.
And that's because too often, there's the practical reality of time. Lack of time, lack of resources to do this. So if you've got a precedent of a template or a company has a precedent, this is what they're doing, what they're using. They don't necessarily have time to go through and make a wholesale change to improve the language. And so then who's going to do that? Well, what's going to come from outside counsel, because you're on the billable hour model primarily, or if you're not even on a fixed fee, there's a time crunch to get that. And so and there may not necessarily be the skill with certain lawyers to make that translation, but regardless, you're not going to get that plain language primarily because of time constraint or a cost constraint. If you remove those, so if you give someone the time to breathe and time to make those changes, and you sort of see the upside that there is going to be a return on the investment, then you could get it done. That's sort of what I find hard to reconcile in reality. But there are some clients who are really willing to do it. And I think there's a regulatory impetus in a lot of ways where we're going to have to make this change. You're seeing it in privacy law. I think a lot of consumer law is going to go in that direction as well. I'll give you a couple examples, if I can, on privacy. So you have under GDPR, things have to be in plain I'm not going to quote the specific provisions, but it has to be plain, understandable language. In 2012, Kamala Harris, when she was Attorney General in California, and they were bringing out the California Consumer Privacy Protection Act. I'm mixing up the acronym there, but you get my point. She said her office gave recommendations that it has to be clear, understandable language, and even use things like tables and graphical elements. In Canada, we have an update in our privacy legislation that is before the House. And so the bill there requires plain, understandable language for the purposes for collection of information. And I've gone to some webinars and you have lawyers saying, we don't even know what that means. Well, I do. And so it's make it understandable. It doesn't have to be words. It could be infographics so you're meeting the purpose. So that's kind of thinking back to legal design. It's being a little more human. It's meeting that user. So in this case, the person needing to know how their information is going to be used, disclosed, and so forth. Putting yourself in their shoes, thinking from their shoes, and maybe that's the better way to sort of. I give one thing to the viewers today is put yourself in the shoes of the person who's going to be getting this legal service or getting this legal agreement and using it. If you have the time, talk to them and find out what they need before you actually go run off and do it.
You mentioned on my kind of favorite conversation about in-house lawyers, the former general counsel. I definitely like making things simple, complete for my clients. I like folks on my team to have a relationship with a contract that is not dysfunctional, that they know that they have a contract that governs the relationship. They know what's in it. They know how to check it, and they really can easily go forward and build businesses. The ecosystem in-house is increasingly complex and has many other actors. We're talking about legal operators. And thank God we're now including other professionals to helping us build the brighter future of law. Because it turns out as if people have a lot to bring to the table. Again, mind blown. But how can legal design be helpful, not just to in-house lawyers, not just to the office of the general counsel and those with the JD and members of the bar, but to this much larger ecosystem of people who have relationship with law?
Sure. So if we look at the larger organizations, a lot of them are using design thinking. So it's nothing foreign to them as a concept. So I think one way we could look at it is a way for the legal department to collaborate with other aspects of the organization or the business. So sales and customer success have mapped out a customer journey, and they're focusing on the customer service experience. Well, is legal a part of that? Is legal on the customer journey map? And and then if it is, are you looking to make sure that the contracting process or dealing with customer complaints, warranty issues, which some, depending on the organization, may touch in legal, is that being thought of? Another way that's important in sort of the larger organization is, legal ops. That's a great role to actually implement some of the thinking, and I bet they are, if they're sort of taking that design thinking or mentality or an agile approach or other sort of project management approach to solve some of the process issues, some of the flow issues. They're looking at the underlying problem or an underlying root cause to a problem. And then also it's change management. So when you're bringing in, let's say, a new technology or a process change, well, within that implementation, you have to look at it at proper change management. And change management is really about focusing on the people who are going to be using that new tool. It's got to work for them, because if it doesn't work, you're actually making larger problems, wasting money, and you're ingraining sort of that thing that didn't work. So those are just a couple of big areas. Another one is procurement. Too could actually get a benefit for that, because
has a relationship with law.
Absolutely. And procurement in terms of the contracting process, but looking at it from a process perspective, from an efficiency perspective, if you think back to what I was talking about it's an innovation mindset. And so it's looking at the user. So procurement could look at who are the users seeking procurement, how they are going to use the agreement. Maybe it's in terms of vetting. Maybe that's how things are going to be scored a little different. So there's a lot of different functions that could do that. But I think the best way is that collaborative approach. Bring legal into some of the other processes, especially if there isn't a product counsel role. Well, maybe legal could sort of infuse itself into some of the creation, sort of the product groups, so it can be a little more curious and think a little less critically and always pouring water, sort of cold water on the fire, but actually thinking a little more like, how might we be able to do this? And so shifting at that. And you do see a lot of that in the product counsel role, but again, where it's not there, that's one way legal could help the business, is on the revenue generating side, thinking about how could legal or the law actually be a way to generate revenue? Maybe it gives you a competitive advantage because your jurisdiction has a law like this versus another jurisdiction. So there's a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I love using the analogy of food. We all know that fusion food is, when you take two different cuisines, it tastes fantastic. There are many examples of it. And I can tell you that the fusion of law feels, looks, and functionally fantastic. So that's definitely a way to go about it. You mentioned a couple of times sort of, DIY aspect of it. Let's talk about, DIY, where you can start, if you're starting out, if you have a budget, if you want to get your toes wet, some tips for those of us who like the DIY.
Yes. So I'm a big believer in DIY, a big believer of being nimble and quick. And this is actually talked about sort of how do you reconcile the lawyer mindset with the designer mindset. I think that's one way where it's hard, because a lot of lawyers fashion themselves as perfectionists, and taking this design mindset is the antithesis to that, because you're setting yourself up for trial and error, and most importantly, iteration. And that's really the one great thing you could get out of this. So you're going to prototype, but it's not prototype in terms of pilot. So think of actually making that most viable or minimum viable product that actually is going to do something. It's getting scrappy. It might be like getting a piece of paper and just writing out your form and just role playing, testing that. And so that's one way to DIY, is sort of get crafty, get creative. Don't worry about it looking shiny from the get-go. Another way, if you're interested in legal design, it is something you could sort of do on your own, because remember, it's a thinking, it's a mindset, but the actual doing it, well, that just goes depend in terms of resources and time. So there's some great groups like Legal Creatives where you could learn about legal design and actually get certified as a practitioner, but also in the doing. So that's where a lot of it comes. So do the reading, listen to the podcast, read some articles. It's out there. There's a lot of materials out there. And one great one, you can look at IDEO, which sort of is a big in the design thinking space.
IDEO is where it started.
That's right. Tim Brown and so forth. That's right. And so their general counsel is not only their GC, but she's on their design teams. And so she's been on some podcasts and there's some interviews with her. So there's a lot of different places you could do the reading. And that's great, but then it's the doing. And so that's maybe where lawyers themselves may have a little bit of a trouble sort of going all in, because It's that application of applying design thinking and the law together. There's not always the time to do that, or applying it to a legal service. But if you're thinking it, you understand it, you're going to be able to move in that space. Or if you're bringing in outside help, sort of understand where they're coming from, but also inform them better. But it's going to help a common understanding. So those are some tips. Just look for resources on design thinking. Check out some of the certification bodies that are on there, either on design thinking or legal design specifically. I'd mentioned Tessa had chatted, so she's behind Legal Creatives. That's where I got one of my certifications, and I endorse it here. And then do it. Just practice it. Yeah. Jump into it and practice it. That's probably the best way.
No shortage of books on design generally, and IDEO and D-School at Stanford have put out quite a number of resources on their website. There's
Margaret Hagan.
Some books that you can buy as well, and there are a number of people. I love what Tessa is doing with Legal Creatives. Her content is fantastic. I highly recommend joining and other lawyers all over the world to make this an international exciting effort. I love the energy of that place. I'll be speaking there in a couple of weeks. So hope to see many of you there as well. She's doing quite a lot. There's a lot of resources. Once you read a book or two and change your mindset,
I have a couple.
I'll give you an opportunity to speak. You will not be able to stop to redesign everything around you. I had an opportunity to be part of the D-School workshops actually over 10 years ago when I graduated from law school, that I could not take my designer hat on, even if you asked. So highly recommend. So Marty, what are the books you recommend?
Sure. So there's Law by Design by Margaret Hagan. There's another one called Design Thinking, The Answer to the Impasse Between Innovation and Regulation. That's by Alice Armitage and a few others. And that was actually a paper in a Georgetown Law Review. So that's Design Thinking, The Answer to the Impasse Between Innovation and Regulation. Another book we talked about, IDEO, Tim Brown, his book, Change by Design, sort of a seminal book in legal design. Also check out in Design Thinking. Check out the book, The Design of Business by Roger Martin. And then Design Thinking in Legal Practice Management. That's a paper by Mark Sabo. So I'd check those out. But I'd love to know a little more. I don't know if we go in that direction. We're maybe coming to our time, but more your experience in legal design and how you've been able to use it.
Oh, my favorite application, and actually will recommend the book Design Your Life by some of the same people. It comes with a workbook. I got an opportunity to be part of design workshops straight out of law school. So my mind was polluted early on. And I came at it initially not to redesign law. That seems like a monumental big task. I just wanted to be a happier lawyer. And I wanted to practice law in a way that, is not inconsistent with who Olga is. And that really thinking through what my priorities are, the user of one and how to make that user of one happy in this thing called law and how to carve her own path. That has been something that I've been basically doing for my entire legal career. And it later morphed into design thinking law. And I've taught design thinking at Berkeley Law a couple of times now. So I have this dance with design the entire time I've been practicing law, most of it applying to my legal career, but increasingly over time applying it in my legal practice in-house. And one of many reasons why I redesigned some of the practices as in-house lawyer. So I have a very deep relationship with law.
Well, it's just something that you had said, sort of practicing law the way Olga wants. That made me think that, and what that means to you, it makes me think that, when you build something people actually want, instead of begrudgingly what you think they need, or maybe that they reluctantly need or get to that just basic need. So when it's what they want, it gets easier. They're going to use it more. It comes back to that engagement. And so I think that's a great takeaway for in-house counsel is start talking to people first before you go build something out, or you're going to solve a problem. So you're actually getting to what's underlying those needs of the users, and it comes back to that user centricity.
Yourself first, before you even talk to anyone else, ask yourself, what is beautiful, enjoyable legal practice look like? I think if you start with a user one, which is you will find that that's a really good start. But yeah, definitely talk to your clients too.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's some more shout outs from Stanley about the holy grail of a happy lawyer. I cannot agree more. Happy lawyer,
and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, sort of going on my own, but it allows me to sort of pull in these different interests, the creative side, but always wanting to help people, but in a sort of a crackerjack kind of way. That's kind of how I see myself. But the design thinking or legal design is that lens in which to do it. So yeah, I'm a happier lawyer.
Join the club.
Yeah.
Some people think that, design thinking in law or anywhere else, is a pile of nonsense. And I'm trying not to use derogatory words.
Mm-hmm.
In your parting words, I guess, maybe share some thoughts, on that. And then practically where folks, whether they're out of law school, in the beginning of their career, middle career, or end of their career. I want to be intentionally inclusive. You can use those principles anytime before retirement and after. What are your thoughts there?
So I guess biggest parting thought is don't get confused when you hear design. It's not visual. It's a mindset approach to actually focusing on the human and the user needs. That's the biggest thing. Think about other people, think about who's actually using your thing, and you would then gear everything towards that. All will be good. And don't rely on assumptions. Go out and get information, measure information, talk to people, and then go build something. If you're going to go build something in terms of getting better innovation. And sort of this legal design is about one thing, and that's creating measurable, tangible value. And that's the biggest thing for in-house. In-house wants value from its outside counsel. So outside counsel, you want to deliver value that don't just think about what value you assume what value means to your client, no matter who the client is, find out what value means to them. So you're going to tailor things to the individual. And that's my biggest sort of pull and plug. And then for lawyers as advice, don't try and be perfectionists. So be fluid, be creative, be nimble. That's that's my biggest thing. Perfectionism is really being particular, and particular to your tastes. So learn to sort of deprogram yourself from that and go to think about what the actual.
You don't have to deprogram. When you satisfy user number one, it becomes addictive. You can't stop. I'm telling you, 10 years of
you're right.
15 years of doing this, I can tell you that's true.
But then give yourself permission to make that leap, that first leap. There's my spin. Give yourself permission to make that first leap. Be afraid to fail and iterate. Not to say you got to be sloppy and make mistakes, but failure's fine because you're going to have to learn from that in terms of what's actually working and not working. So yeah, those are some parting thoughts.
Marty, thank you so much. And I'll see everyone next week. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Bye.